Hey, so we left off with the updates that came with episode 20 and 21. And right at the end of that, I actually changed the code a little bit just to show you how it worked. And I made these, I don't know, super bees. Crazy. We had two different kinds of enemies. We have, the animations starting to get a little bit better. The AI for the enemies changed, meaning they didn't just go randomly around the screen in a predetermined path. Now they can know where you are as the player and follow you around. So if we take a look at what some of the changes were today, so what we notice is I've got an HP bar above the actual enemies this time. So the bats had 2 hit points. The bees only have 1, but they shoot faster. So if I hit a bat, obviously half of its HP is gone, and it shows up as a half-filled HP bar. The way we can fool around with some code today, just change it to show why it's better to do things kind of dynamically or with variables. So the variables change, and that changes the animation automatically instead of having to hard code it in. Other things that are different, you should notice that, like if I move my mouse around, we have different animations for the player now. The player isn't just always looking down, or the enemies aren't always looking down. Now they can detect where you are and also change the image that shows. Plus, we have some movement that's been coded in. So those are done through Sprite Sheets and kind of using the draw function to only show certain chunks of the Sprite Sheet. And I can show you what that is as well. What else did we do today? Whoops, wrong one. Yeah, sprite animation and auto shooting. Yep. Okay. So it's hard for you to pick up on this, but now all I have to do to shoot is hold down the mouse key, where before I had to constantly click to do it. But now I can click down either button and it's just going to automatically auto fire. That was another thing that we added to this section as well. So if we take a look at some of the code for that, we had HP bar first of all. So I don't remember where it is. So with this one, I think it's right here. So we overwrote or added to, I guess. I didn't overwrite it because I saved my super draw as the original self.draw function from the actor, or probably the entity actually, which drew the actual image. But then we had to do another extra step. We had to draw the HP bar. So the original self.draw, if we go find that entity, there it is drawing the picture of the enemy in this case. But we put an HP bar above, so how we did that is I actually did something different than the person in the game or in the video did that showed me this. He just duplicated the code, but I created separate functions for figuring out the X position and the Y position of whatever entity it is. So now I just call the position X function for that object, and I'm adding half of the width of my image, because if I didn't do this, let's take it out actually. Okay, I'll just cut it out for right now to make me save. So if I go back to my game, I haven't refreshed yet, so this is nicely centered over that. But if I refresh it, then you notice that it's drawing things a little bit goofy like. not quite centered, so I just added that into my function. Other stuff, do that. Minus 20 here just means you go 20 pixels higher than the image of the Y position, the top of the picture. So that's all that does. It offsets it a little bit. Then whenever you draw stuff, you save the canvas. We called it CTX. Then we restore it at the end. So that just makes sure that goofy things don't happen, and it kind of refreshes it nicely. And then we change the fill style. Oh, that's why. So we're saving the original properties pretty much there. So these are going to go back to normal later on after I do the restore. So I changed it to red, and then I had to make a separate HP parameter here. So if we take a look at actor, I believe, I think I already went by it. Oh, it's just minimized, so that's why I didn't see it. So HP max, and all I do is I set it equal to my HP, which means that this is going to store how much HP the enemy or the player had at the beginning. It won't change, because whenever we take away from HP, we're affecting this variable. So if I get hit by a bullet, the HP max is gonna be 10, but I only subtract from my HP. So then that gives me the ability to go 9 out of 10, and I can draw a bar that's got 9/10 of it filled in with red. So then I go to, oh man, actor. That's why I can't see it. Enemy. So what this does is it pretty much calculates a percentage. You take your part divided by your whole, and you multiply it by 100, and that gives you the width of your bar. Okay. Then if my width is less than 0, I just make the width equal to 0, so nothing goofy happens. Like if I get hit with 3 bullets at the same time, I just want it to show 0. I don't want it to be all wonky leftward facing boxes. And then the other thing I do is I fill the rectangle with starting at my X, which I have right up here, and I offset it to be centered. And I subtract 50 from that as well. Maybe that's why. Maybe if I didn't subtract that 50, I wouldn't need to do this. Let's try that out. I didn't take it out of the second one, so it's going to be goofy still, but I just want to see if that works. No. That does not work. Oh, that's because I did that. Yes. Oh dear. Okay, that's where it came from. I must have accidentally changed it. I was pretty sure that there was supposed to be a 20 there. So let's try that one, I guess. Find an enemy. Oh, I guess we'll revert. And I have enemy. Draw. X minus 50. Okay, cool. Let's just make sure that it works again. Alright, I just saw that and wanted to test it out, see if I really needed that minus 50 or not. Apparently I do. So that just keeps things in the right location. Then we set it to the Y, which I subtracted 20 from already. And then the width is how much red, how much HP you still have left. And I set the height of the box to 10, just because that's how big it kind of looked decent with. So then there's also a black box around it, so you can see like how empty the original box was. So we do that with a stroke rectangle, which means it's like an outline. It doesn't fill it in, it just does the outline. So I set it to the same place, so minus 50 at y, but I set my width to 100, which is how much my width is if my HP is completely full, and then to 10. So then that draws the nice little black box that's around that you can see. So if I hit one that actually has some HP built up, like that, you still see that empty box. It's just not filled with red. So that's what that stroke rectangle did. That's the HP bar. It's in player, I believe. How we did the automatic shooting without having to click incessantly was doing something similar to something similar to when we were pressing a key. So we made a variable for, like, if you're pushing the S button, which is down on the game, you are going to set this to true, and it's going to stay true for as long as you're pressing S. So we did something similar. We pressing mouse left or mouse right, set them equal to false, and where we change those is we used to just have on mouse click or on context menu, which was right click. And I actually took out the on click completely, because now what we really need to do is figure out when a mouse button is pushed down or when a mouse button is let go of or up on mouse up. So what this function does is it just tells you when the mouse, when any mouse button is clicked. So that could be the left, the right, or some mouses have the little scroll ball. If you push that, it will be a separate kind of click. So on left, mouse.which tells you which button was pushed. The left one is a 1, the right one is a 3. I used 2 at first. I'm assuming that's if you push the scroll button in the middle, but I didn't really test it out. So then I set them equal to true depending on which button is pushed. And as long as that button doesn't get let go of on mouse up, it's going to be true and you're going to shoot continuously. The moment you let go of that mouse button, you change that back to false and you stop shooting. So that shooting part comes in. Where is the shooting part? Oh, right here. So in the update function for the player, I have one thing that we'll look at here later, but I added these two things here. So if self.pressing mouse left, what tests whether this is true or false. So if it's true, you're going to perform an attack. If it's true for pressing right, you're going to perform a special attack. Right. And it'll just keep doing that automatically as long as you're holding down either one of those buttons. Okay, so that's the automatic shooting. That was the HP bar. And for the life of me, I feel like there was a third one in that episode, but I can't remember it right now. So sprite animation. Oh, static class functions. It was a little bit different way of organizing the code. What we had before were global variables or functions. So what I did is I created some different ones here. If I get these all shortened and whatnot. Okay, so what I had before was like enemy list. I created a variable up above, I call it var enemy list equals empty list. So it was empty at the beginning, and I did this. And what this means is it's a global variable because I created it kind of without having a class associated with it, like enemy is a class or a group of code. And this means that I could access or use enemy list anywhere in my code as long as it was imported correctly. Like this thing right here is importing or letting us know that I'm using this file entities.js as well. So as long as things are imported right, I could call that function anywhere. And Why that's not necessarily the best way to do it, it obviously worked. It's been working for 20 some odd episodes. But when you start doing things like, what's one that we use all the time? We use update constantly. We've got many different update functions, and they're all over the place. So let's say that I created a global function called update, and it was in this file, and this game starts getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and I have to break it into many, many files, not just two. The chance of me having a function somewhere else that's called update is pretty good. So if I have a global variable in this file, the test game file, and it's called update, and then later on, maybe I have, let's just say I have another update in here, and it's not linked with this kind of dot update position or dot update, you can very easily erase or overwrite the other update function that's in some other different file that you may have even forgotten about. And that'll break your code. And it'll be frustrating because it'll probably, the game will probably compile right. The game will probably appear to not crash because the code's probably written right. But it'll do goofy things because you erased a function that you shouldn't have erased with different code. So if you do what's called a static variable or static class, I guess it's in this one, what you're going to end up doing is tying those variables or functions directly to a class that you've already made. So now in order to use upgrade or randomly generate an upgrade is what it used to be called. Now you have to go upgrade.randomly generate. So when I called that in the update loop over here, I had to just kind of rearrange things to say, it wasn't here, but there it is, upgrade.randomly generate. Now, there's obviously two functions that are named the same thing, but since they're tied or linked to two different classes, they've become static classes. And the only way to change this function is if you use that upgrade dot before it. So now it kind of keeps them separated, and you can have tons of different functions, tons of different variables that are actually have the same name, like randomly generate. And it keeps them separated and makes it easier to not screw up your code accidentally. So that's what we did with all the different entities is we made these little static variables or functions. Right? Didn't actually change anything in the game, to be perfectly honest, but sometimes reorganizing things doesn't really do much. Okay, and then the sprites. So the fact that now I'm not always just looking down and it appears that I am walking around, or the bats are flying, or the bees are flying. Okay, how that happened is in the draw function for the actor, I believe. It's entity, player, actor. Okay, so before I don't think we had a draw function for the actor itself. We just used the standard run-of-the-mill draw function from the entity. We just inherited it. So it created it in the entity, and this is what we used, and that was good when we just wanted to have one image move around the screen. But if we want to have a moving image or a different image for depending on your orientation, like what way you're moving, you actually need to create what's called a sprite sheet. So this is a sprite sheet for the things that move around and interact with the players or the enemies. And how this is different than before is before we just had this image of the bat, I think, or no, it was this one right there. and that was the only one we had. But now we have, what, 12 different pictures. We've got a bat moving upwards, to the left, downwards, and to the right. And there's like 3 different animations to kind of make it look like it's flapping. So if you want to just show the way that the bat is moving in a direction, you've got to be able to crop out just one image. So if you're moving upwards, you want to crop out that image. If you're moving to the left, you want to show just that image. And you can do this all with one picture, and it's kind of built into that draw function that we used before. We just hadn't really implemented the whole cropping feature that much. So this works. This is going to draw the whole image and not crop anything. So I start at 0, 0, and I go to my full image width and my full image height. And since my bullets and my upgrades and my map don't have multiple sprites or pictures of the same thing, I want to use that original draw function. I want to draw the whole thing. Okay, so those two entities use this original function. But then in the actor, which are the enemies and players, I want to overwrite that. So I created a self.draw function, and I didn't use this whole super draw thing. I didn't need to use any of the functions from the original one. I just made a new one that works for actors. So I always do my ctx.save and then restore at the end. So I save my settings and I restore the settings at the end. But now what I'm doing is I've got lots of stuff going on in here actually. I've got frame width or frame height, and you'll notice that it's divided by 3 divided by 4, like the overall width and height divided by 3 and 4. So if we take a look at our sprite, I've got 4 rows going up and down the y direction. I've got 3 columns going left and right the x direction. So all I'm doing there is I'm taking the full width and dividing it by 3. So my frame is going to be 1/3 of the picture. And then in the y direction, it's going to be 1/4 of the picture. So that helps me say that the image that I'm going to draw, that's the frame that I want to crop it to, is that size. Okay. Then let's actually show what happens if I don't have some of these things in there and I just have it be what it was originally. Frame width, I think I want image. What is this one? Crop start? No, crop width. Okay, I think I want the same thing that I had here to be just like the original. So if we save that and see what that did, probably is going to break it. Well, it kind of did what I was looking for. There must have been something that I screwed up though. So it should show the whole image. I wonder what I did. Oh, I need inch. So now I kind of have a squat little version of my whole sprite sheet, which is obviously not what I want it to look like. So I've got to figure out a way to kind of crop this image, figure out which one I need to be showing. Am I going to be going up, down, left, right, that kind of stuff. So let's take a look at that first part. Okay. The first part, if I take this out and just store it in my clipboard and have it 0, I have a direction mod. So mod is a function that tells you the remainder of dividing something. It's pretty good for doing kind of these, which one do I need to use based on some other number. So direction mod, I determine right here. So direction mod, the default equals 3 because that's going to be drawing to the right. If my angle is between 45 and 135, I'm going to be drawing down. So 45 and 135, oops, down here. Then if I go to the left, although it looks like to the right on the screen there, it's between these angles. If it's up, it's between those angles. And I change the number that I'm going to be multiplying by here. So if the frame height is 0, then what this tells me is my up image is on the top. And if it's going up, I multiply my frame height by 0, which means I start at 0. And it's going to show this top row here. And then multiplying by 1 is meaning to the left, multiplying by 2 is going down, multiplying by 3 is going to the right. So I just figure out what angle I'm going, and then that multiplying by either 0, 1, 2, or 3 is going to get me to the right row. So if I do this and I put a 0 in here for right now, which means I don't actually change, I won't look like I'm walking. So I update that. And now it just cycles through one picture because I made that 0, which means I'm always going to start at the left side of my sprite sheet. 0 in that one location tells you to start at the left. And then it changes which row I go to based on the angle of either my mouse or for the enemies based on where I am. If I'm above them, then they're going to be moving up. Okay. That's how that works. And the next part was I just kind of change this back. I have my walking mod, and I multiply that by my frame width. So it's going to try to figure out which column do I need to be in. Now how I do that is I created a variable called sprite anim counter or animation counter, and that was just a variable within the actor class. So self.sprite animation counter is 0. And how I change that is if I go to my player or my actor or player or enemy functions in the update loop, I believe. That. Oh yeah, it's right there. So if I'm going to update the value of that by 0.2 every time. So why 0.2? Let's change it to 1, which was what the original number was. Let's save that. Okay. Why 1 is because now it kind of looks like I'm like shuffling around really, really quickly. So instead of updating it 1 every frame that goes by, if I do it by 0.2, it kind of makes it normal speed and makes it look nicer and more realistic, I guess. So now it's a slower rate. It's going to update or change the image every 5 frames that go by instead of once every frame. So instead of jogging, now it looks like I'm walking. Okay. So this other stuff here, the reason why I have this if function above it is I'm only going to update that animation counter if I'm actually moving. So if I take, let's actually comment that out. So if I take that part out, what it's going to do is it's going to actually make it look like I'm walking all the time, even though I'm not pushing any buttons, which is fine for the enemies because they're literally always moving all the time. But the player can just stay in one position. And if I stop, it'd be nice if that did stop. So that's what that part did. So now if I change that and update, refresh, now if I stop pushing any buttons, the animation stops for the player. Okay. And the enemies do the same thing, except for they don't have this little if function there. It's just every time they're updated, they go up by 0.2. Okay, so that's how I changed that animation counter. And then I do this little function here. This is the modular symbol. So it means what is the remainder if I divide by 3? So if this value here, the math.floor means I round down all the time, so I'm always going to take a whole number divided by 3. Let's say I get to a 1, and I divide that by 3. I'm going to actually have, what, a remainder of 1. So 3 doesn't go into 1 any times, and there's 1 left over. If I have a 2, I divide it by 3. 3 doesn't go into 2, so I have a remainder of 2. If I have a frame rate of 3 or frame counter of 3, 3 divided by 3 works perfectly. There's no remainder, so it's going to be 0. So I guess I should actually change that to 0, 1, and 2. Then I start doing 4s. So this is going to divide by 3. So 3 goes into 4 once. And if you take 3 away from 4, you're going to be left over, have a remainder of 1. So this modular function is really great for especially things like counters, where the value keeps getting higher and higher, but you need to have one of 3, in this case, one of 3 options for kind of which column am I going to use. So the 0 means the first column, the 1 means the second, and the 2 means the third column in our sprite sheet like this. So then I actually take that walking mod, which is going to be either 0, 1, or 2, and I multiply it by the frame width, which is how wide the column is. I took that right here, self.image_width, and divided it by 3. So then that's going to, if it's a 0, it's going to be on the left column. If it's a 1, it's going to be in the middle column, and if it's a 2, it's going to be on the right side. And it just cycles through all that stuff automatically. So did I save? Nope. I broke it. Okay. That's always fun. Let's see if it's an error that it's detecting, or if it's one of the harder ones. Okay, ungot reference player is not defined. And key up. Okay. Okay, unexpected number right here. Doing examples and didn't take out my example. Real. So let's delete you. So now it's going to walk through the little walking animation. What it's doing right now is when my mouse is up, is every couple frames it goes to a different column, so it slightly looks like I'm moving. And that's how the majority of games that have players and enemies that are walking around work. They have a sprite image, which is just a series of images. And if you get more complicated, it might be you might have a lot more rows or a lot more columns. So you can have like angled players or a more sophisticated like step or flap, things like that. But it's just moving through different sets of related images on what's called a sprite sheet. Okay, with that, what does he say we're doing next? Map collision and map part 2. Not super sure what that means, other than we're going to be colliding with a map. Maybe it's something to do with the edges, but otherwise, we have a pretty sophisticated game, I guess, for just doing a little bit of coding and having some images. Otherwise, see you next time.